Hey there, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live at 5, hosted by Mister Stu TV. My name is Stuart Perry. I also go by Mister Stu, and I am a child therapist and television personality who loves talking about children's mental health. Today, we're going to be talking about common mental health meds for children, what they can and cannot do. I've worded it a little bit different, what they don't do versus what they do. Uh, can be used both ways, but what they can and cannot do, some common myths and misconceptions, and we'll also be talking about some of the common types of mental health meds that are prescribed for children. Before we jump into that, though, I do want to go over just a few announcements that we have. There's a lot of exciting things happening over at Mister Stu TV that I want to tell you about. So, our first announcement is that on March 31st, we have a parenting conference that is going to be taking place. It will be here on Facebook Live. It's from 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. so you can join us during your lunchtime. It's going to be myself, another member of Mister Stu TV, Miss Shamika. She is also a child and family therapist who is certified in racial and community trauma. And our special guests are Brian and Maggie Harlow. They are entrepreneurs and the parents of Grammy-nominated artist Jack Harlow. And we're going to be talking about how parent is a verb. Some things that you can actually do to support the growth and development of your children and your relationship with your children. So make sure that you join us on March 31st at 11:30 for that virtual parenting conference, Parent is a Verb. Next, I always want to make sure that you know we are on YouTube. Mister Stu TV is on YouTube. While these talks here are mainly for trusted adults in kids' lives, our YouTube channel is mainly for those kids. We make tough emotions child's play. So kids can watch our videos and learn about different emotions and learn what to do when they're faced with different emotions. But our overall message is that it's okay to feel however you feel. You choose how to respond. So check out Mister Stu TV on YouTube. It's youtube.com/at Mister Stu TV. Make sure to check that out. Like and follow us so that you don't miss out on any of the fun that we have over there. Then coming up in 2 weeks, I am doing another Facebook Live where we will be talking about understanding autism spectrum disorder. And on that day, April 2nd, the next week is actually Autism Awareness Day, National Autism Awareness Day. And so on the 26th of March, we will be exploring autism and understanding a little bit more about that disorder, autism spectrum disorder. So make sure that you join us for that. But today we are talking about mental health meds, what they can and cannot do, what they do, what they don't do. And I am so excited to be talking with you about this topic. It's one that, as a child therapist, parents have a lot of questions about mental health meds. They want to make sure that the meds that they're prescribing for their children are going to actually help with the different things that they want them to help with. Sometimes they have some misconceptions about what those meds are going to do. Sometimes they have some misconceptions about how those meds are used, and sometimes there are some misconceptions about how those meds work in the brain. So today we're going to be talking about all of those things, and hopefully we'll clear up some questions that you may have about the children in your life, or maybe we give you some things to think about for the future as you consider different mental health treatments. So today we're talking about those meds. Let's first start talking about the different categories, the different classifications of medication. The first are what are called antidepressants. These are typically prescribed for depression. They are anti-depression, so they're typically prescribed for depression or anxiety. And the most common form of these meds is what are called SSRIs. SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Let's talk about what that means. SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Basically, there's a chemical in the brain that's called serotonin. And that serotonin is something that helps direct attention, and it helps with a few other things in the brain as well. Well, that serotonin gets taken up to do different things, to help with different things in the brain. With depression and with anxiety, sometimes what can happen is that too much serotonin gets taken up. That's why this is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. This prohibits serotonin from being uptaken. It's a serotonin inhibitor that it inhibits the uptake process. So the process of that serotonin going to do other things, it leaves more serotonin in place in the brain. There's a lot of different common types of SSRIs or antidepressants, but in children, some of the most common ones are escitalopram, or what's called Lexapro would be a brand name. Fluoxetine, which is things like Prozac. Let's see, what else? Sertraline, which is brand name would be Zoloft. Different things like that. Those are all SSRIs that prevent that serotonin from being taken up, help leave more serotonin in the brain so that the brain can direct attention to the different places that it needs to direct that attention to. That is the first type of medication. And if you are wanting to learn more about depression, then on April 23rd at 5 p.m., our talk here on Facebook Live, I am so sorry, my slides are messing up just a little bit, and I know what I did. But our topic is going to be understanding depression and just what depression really is, because really what's happening in the brain during depression is that the brain is depressed. It's not that the person will always feel depressed or feel sad, but the brain is depressed, meaning the brain isn't functioning at the pace that it's supposed to. That serotonin isn't quite going all the places it needs to go to direct attention to all the different places that it needs to direct attention to. So the brain feels sluggish or depressed. Those SSRIs help decrease that serotonin being uptaken, and then the brain can direct serotonin to different places so that the brain is really firing on all cylinders. If you want to learn more about the chemistry behind that and more of what's going on in the brain during depression, that it is more than sadness, then make sure you tune in to our talk on understanding depression, taking place on April 23rd, right here on Facebook Live at 5 p.m. The next common form of mental health med in children are what are called stimulants. Stimulants are medications typically prescribed for ADHD, and they are things like Vyvanse, Ritalin, looking at my notes, Adderall, Concerta, and Focalin. And they stimulate, so remember with the antidepressants, they prohibit that uptake of serotonin. Well, a stimulant stimulates more of a chemical that's called dopamine in the brain. Dopamine is all over the news. It does all kinds of great things, but basically its job is it gives us this reward feeling. When you can check something off your checklist and it feels good, that's dopamine going in the brain. When you win a video game and it feels good, that's dopamine going off in the brain. And typically those things happen, the dopamine process happens almost instantly, where we just feel that reward very quickly. In ADHD, dopamine is depressed in the brain. So what is actually happening is it's not that children have a lack of attention, it's that they have a lack of reward for that attention. They have a lack of dopamine flooding them to make them stay in one spot and be rewarded by that. Their brain is constantly trying to find more rewards, so they're running around in different places and thinking about all kinds of different things, chasing after more dopamine. Stimulants help produce more dopamine in the brain so that attention isn't the only way to get that dopamine or to get that feeling of reward. So that's some stimulants. These are the ones that are the most misunderstood from the way that I can see it in my practice. Stimulants are definitely the one that parents think are just going to solve all of their problems and be a miracle cure. And while they are great and they do great things and they can help in big, big ways, they are commonly misunderstood as a medication. So that's stimulants. Next up are what are called mood stabilizers. These are much less common in children, but I did want to cover them because a lot of times what can happen is that psychiatrists will use things in what's called an off-label prescription, meaning that basically the psychiatrist would prescribe a medication hoping that a side effect of that medication will help out. It might not be exactly what the medication is intended for, but psychiatrists have found that different medications can help with certain symptoms, and so they can sometimes prescribe those medicines even if it might not be exactly what the medicine is used for. Let me give you an example. An example of this would be Abilify. So Abilify is a medicine that is prescribed as a mood stabilizer, but it is also prescribed for other things and was actually created for other things. But we have found that Abilify can also help with depressed thoughts, and it can help with this depressed mood. So Abilify, while it wasn't intended for use with depression, can help with some symptoms of depression, so psychiatrists may prescribe it. That's the most common way that these are prescribed in children because these are some pretty heavy meds. Another mood stabilizer that is a fairly intense one is lithium. So, and again, I'm looking at a lot of different screens here. So lithium is one that would not be commonly prescribed for children because it is very strong and can cause a lot of side effects. So it could be that the psychiatrist understands the child needs some type of mood stabilizer, but they don't want to prescribe something that's going to be harsh. So they'll prescribe something off-label so that it will help in different ways that may not be exactly what they were intended for, but it can still help. Hopefully that makes some sense. So those are the three common types of mental health meds, especially those that are used for children: antidepressants, stimulants, and mood stabilizers. And the mood stabilizers, again, are the least common form, and a lot of times it's an off-label mood stabilizer, not a mood stabilizer that is really a strong one that could actually harm children. All right, let's look at now some common mental health med myths and what mental health meds actually can and cannot do, or what they actually do and don't do. What they do and what they don't do. Let's talk about this first one. The first common misconception or the first common myth with mental health meds is that they should be the first thing that you go to. That if you are facing a problem, you know what, go to your doctor, get this pill, and it will just take care of everything that you need. A lot of times this is not a great strategy, and there's a few reasons why. First off, diagnosis with mental health is a lot different than diagnosis with physical health. Diagnosis with mental health is new, and it has a lot of nuance. It's considered or talked about more as an art rather than a science. And so while mental health professionals have worked to make it as much of a science as they possibly can, It's still much more of an art. Because of that, it could be that your first attempt at getting diagnosed comes up with an improper diagnosis. A very common example of this is in children who have anxiety. Many times, mental health professionals or other professionals may see that as ADHD, when really what the child is facing is maybe some hyperactivity or some difficulty focusing because of anxiety. Now, let's imagine that a doctor believes that this child has ADHD and they prescribe them a stimulant that we just talked about. They prescribe a child with anxiety a stimulant to stimulate more dopamine in the brain. What can then happen is that this anxious child is now prescribed a medication that causes them to focus even harder. And that medication, while it might make them sit more still, is now going to flood their brain with intense thought surrounding that anxiety. So then you have a child who turns even more anxious and then begins to fidget and wiggle even more because they were prescribed the wrong medication because their diagnosis was incorrect. If you use medication as a first resort, then it doesn't allow for all that nuance for things to really be sorted through. When a child comes into my office and a parent says that they're having difficulty focusing, that they are wiggling a lot, that they fidget a lot, that they tap a lot, whatever it might be, many times my brain goes to, okay, well, we probably have an anxious child. But a doctor, a physical health doctor, may look at it and say, well, those are the symptoms of ADHD. And so they'll prescribe medicine for ADHD, but the cause of that behavior is not ADHD. The cause of that behavior for that child was anxiety. And then you've increased the problem, not decreased it. So an important thing is to try to do without medication at first. In my practice, you do have to see a therapist for a few sessions, and then you're allowed to go visit the psychiatrist for medication. But that allows some time to really start some work and ensure that the cause of symptoms is understood before a medication is prescribed for it. Also, there are natural plateaus in therapy. So what can happen as well is that if you add medication too early, then you kind of miss a plateau. And let me explain. So if you make it to your first plateau without medication, now, and you're stuck here, now that medication can take you to plateau 2 rather than it just being a faster track to plateau 1. Therapy kind of works and then plateaus and works and then plateaus and works and then plateaus, just like all other behavior modification or all other work on problems or symptoms. A lot of times it works and then plateaus, works and then plateaus. Well, if you add medication early, you might reach that first plateau faster, but then you're going to have to work even harder to make it to further plateaus. So if you can delay using medication right at first, then you can make it as far as you can. Then the medication can help take you even further in your work with your therapist. So it's a good idea to not use medication as a first resort, but try to do without them first. Doesn't have to be a last resort, but it is something to try to work as hard as you can without the medication and then add the medication as you need it. A second common misconception is that those mental health meds are going to work very quickly and immediately. So I took my antidepressant one time and I don't feel any better. I don't think it's working. A lot of these medications take around 6 weeks to build up in the brain before they're actually making a lot of progress. One caveat to that is that the stimulants, things like Ritalin, Adderall, Focalin, Vyvanse, those things do typically work pretty immediately. And that's also why they are one of the more controlled medications, because they work so quickly, so immediately, that there's also a large street value for those medications. And they give that rush, that feeling, that feeling very quickly. So it's one that people use and abuse. So that's important to think about. So most mental health meds, though, do not work immediately. They do build up over time. And many times the number that we give out is 6 weeks. So if you are taking antidepressants, it might take about 6 weeks for you to feel a real change from those medications. If you are taking a mood stabilizer, it may take around 6 weeks to start to feel those changes, those positive growth in really noticeable ways. The next myth or misunderstanding or misconception is that mental health meds, they do not change behaviors. The therapist or the psychiatrist that I work with in my office at the practice that I work at says that you can't medicate behavior. And I just absolutely love that. You cannot medicate behavior. Giving a child a different mental health med does not change their behavior. What these medications do is they change brain chemistry, and in changing brain chemistry, it may allow that child to think more clearly about their behaviors, and it may allow them to make more connections between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. But medication alone is not going to change behaviors. This is a common call that I get not from parents, but from schools. They will call and say, well, they're taking their Vyvanse, or they're taking their Adderall, or their Ritalin, or whatever else, and it's not working. We need to up the dose. Or they're still getting very angry. They're still throwing chairs. Their medication is not working. We need to up the dose. And those are phone calls that I take every single week. Medication does not change behavior. It changes brain chemistry that can then allow children to have more time and be able to process more information when making choices about their behavior. But we still will have to teach children positive and then the negative ways to behave. They will still need to be taught those lessons. The medication alone does not just do that work automatically. So that's very important to remember. Medication does not change behavior. It does change brain chemistry. Also on this topic, if you would like to learn more about discipline with children and different strategies for discipline, then coming up on May 14th at 5 p.m., there will be another Facebook Live event here on Facebook, and I'm calling it the Great Spank Debate, and we'll be talking about spanking, what's the law, what does spanking do, and then we'll also talk about some alternatives to spanking. So if you are wondering about helping children make more positive choices with their behaviors, then make sure to tune in for that on May 14th. The next common mental health med misconception or mental health med myth, mental health medication does not cure, it does support. Mental health medication does not cure, but it does support. Here's what I mean by that. Mental health medication alone typically does not do the final steps. Mental health medication on its own does not completely resolve all the symptoms or all the negativity of a mental illness. But mental health meds can support other work that can cure those mental illnesses. Let me give an example. Anxiety. When a client comes in for anxiety, we can talk about all sorts of different strategies. Now, their brain chemistry may be off. But even if their brain chemistry was fixed, now their thought patterns have a certain way of going. So because of repetition, because of pattern, their thought patterns are going to continue to go that direction even with medication support. So therapy needs to be in place to help change those thought patterns as well. If you just take the medication, it could be that your brain is working more appropriately, but your thought patterns are still going to be symptomatic or problematic. They're still going to be difficult. But those mental health meds can support a person as they are going through therapy. And a colleague of mine explained it really well one time. They explained mental health meds as a bridge. So if you imagine you need to get from here to there, but there's a giant gap in between, and you need a bridge to get across, medication can sometimes be that bridge. Now, therapy is the thing that got you all the way to the edge of that cliff. And then therapy is going to be the thing that guides you as you cross over. But without that bridge there, it would be really hard to make it to the other side. So medication can be the bridge, but therapy is going to be the thing that actually moves the person to the other side. The great thing about this as well is that it's our next myth, is that many times people think that you're going to have to be on mental health medication forever. That once you're on it, nothing changes. The dosage is always going to be the same or go up, and you are going to be on that medication forever. This is a common misconception because it happens all the time that people get on these medications and then stay on them forever at the exact same dose or move up or whatever. The goal of mental health medication, almost always, the goal is to be able to come off the medication at some point. It may be that that point is never reached. And if that point is never reached, that is completely okay. But the goal should always be, not always, but almost always be to come off of that medication or reduce the dose. Now, in order to do that, you need to work with the doctor who prescribed the medicine to talk about how to decrease, how to discontinue, if you're ready to decrease or discontinue, on and on. But the goal is not to stay on them forever. The goal is to change that over time because, again, it's a bridge. So if you are doing your therapeutic work and you can make it from here to there, well, once you're there, you no longer need that bridge. And so the bridge can be taken away and you can move forward, especially in children. When children are prescribed mental health medication, it's important to talk with the doctor about the goal of, is my child going to be able to come off this medicine? And how will we know that the child is ready to come off of the medicine or to decrease or to change, et cetera, et cetera? How to do all of those things. So most of the time, the goal is not to stay on them forever, especially in children, but that dosage can change over time, and over time it can actually be fully discontinued if all goals are met. That is our talk about mental health meds. If you would like to watch this again, then you can check out the playback here on Facebook, as well as on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@MrStuTV. Also there you will find some episodes that talk about different emotions and teach kids about different mental health ideas and concepts. So make sure to check that out, Mister Stu TV on YouTube. It's youtube.com/@MrStuTV. Make sure that you join us for our virtual parenting conference 2023. Parent is a verb. And there, make sure that you catch my session, the session with Miss Shamika, and the session with Brian and Maggie Harlow, parents of Grammy-nominated artist Jack Harlow. And finally, we will be back here again in 2 weeks on March 26th for our discussion about autism spectrum disorder. Make sure that you tune in for that one to celebrate all of our friends with differences who are on the autism spectrum, and so that we can really understand what that disorder is all about. I will see you back here then. Make sure to join us. I can't wait to see you. And yeah, I will talk to you again very soon. Until then, spread the word and share the love. Bye-bye.